Good morning. I'm Raleigh Flynn. I'm the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute. And this morning we're having a conversation with Ambassador John Campbell, talking about his new book, Nigeria and the Nation State. And the moderator this morning will be Ambassador Charles Ray, who is the chair of FPRI's New Africa program. And this is one of a few events we've already had, and we've had a robust start for this program. And so if you're interested in Africa, we encourage you to stay tuned and watch for coming events and articles on this topic. Ambassador Charles Ray, as I say, is the chair of our Africa program. He's also a trustee of FPRI, and he served as the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia and the Republic of Zimbabwe. He was the first consul general to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, opening the general consulate there in 1998. He's also a member of the board of directors of the American Academy of Diplomacy. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ambassador Ray. But before I do, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Be sure if you have questions, and we'll be turning to them roughly halfway through the program, put them in the Q&A, not the chat, put them in the Q&A. In the chat, we'll be sending interesting information to you, such as a link to Ambassador Campbell's book and some maps of Africa, so you can orient yourself if you're not fully familiar with the whereabouts of Nigeria and that region. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Ambassador Ray.
Thank you, President Flynn. And I'd like to say it's a pleasure and a great honor to introduce Ambassador John Campbell, who is the Ralph Bunche Senior Fellow for Africa Policy Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C., who will be talking about his new book, Nigeria and the Nation State. Ambassador Campbell has a long history in Africa and in diplomacy, having served as a Foreign Service officer from 1975 to 2007. His experience in Nigeria includes a tour as political counselor at the embassy there and then ambassador. In his book, he talks about Nigeria, post-colonial Nigeria, and how diplomats should deal with that country and other countries, other similar countries. And I'd like to start off by asking you, Ambassador Campbell, a question. What was the primary motivation for you for writing this book?
Thank you for that, and thank you very much for having me this morning. Primary motivation for writing the book. It's this. During most of the post-independence period, in other words, since 1960, in Africa, Africa has been more marginal to U.S. foreign policy concerns than most other parts of the world. But I would submit that that's changing, and it's changing very rapidly. Manifestations or reasons for that change. First, demography. UN population experts project that Nigeria, one African state, will in fact displace the United States as the third largest country in the world by population by 2050. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, a similar trajectory. Ethiopia, a similar trajectory. In fact, of the countries of the world that are growing most rapidly in terms of population, they're all in Africa with the exception of Pakistan. Huge increase in population. That in turn has implications in terms of migration patterns. Second reason, disease. The destruction of the African rainforest, in part a result of the explosion of population, means that we have to anticipate diseases jumping from animals to humans. And in fact, two of the most notorious diseases, new diseases, have done exactly that: HIV/AIDS and Ebola. The coronavirus jumped in China, but there are plenty of other viruses lurking in the rainforest of Africa that could do much the same thing. Then there is new economic opportunity. If you're talking about one country, Nigeria, with a population of somewhere between 400 and 450 million people in the next 20 years, that means you can sell an awful lot of shampoo, soap, and razor blades. Then there's politics. Some African countries are on a democratic trajectory, which most Americans, insofar as they're aware of it, would like to support. Others are backsliding. And then finally, there are the security questions. In West Africa, in the Sahel, and particularly in northern Nigeria, there are jihadi movements that are fundamentally hostile to the United States and to our values. And they are also hostile to the states that are there now. The most notorious, perhaps, is Boko Haram, that actively seeks the destruction of the Nigerian state and its replacement by a polity organized around their interpretation of Islamic law, a polity that would not be terribly different from the Islamic State as it was in Iraq and in Syria. So Africa is going to be a lot more important in the future than it has been in the past. And that willy-nilly is going to lead to greater US involvement. But that US involvement carries risks. We saw what happened in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and in Iraq, where policy choices were made without the benefit of a granular knowledge of how those states actually functioned. Further, policy decisions were made based on assumptions of what states are. And those assumptions were based essentially on European precedent that we associate with the Congress of Westphalia in 1648. That is, that the state is a manifestation of an essential unity amongst people, and that state exercises sovereignty and control over the territory within its international boundaries. But I would submit that in the case of many African states, and particularly Nigeria, they don't fit very well that perception of a nation state. In Nigeria, for example, national identity is extremely weak. People are largely alienated from the government, have as little to do with it as possible. Their primary loyalty is to family, religion, ethnicity, in some cases region. And, oh yes, by the way, I guess at the end of the day, we're also Nigerian. But loyalty to Nigeria comes way down the list. Further, the government, the federal government in Abuja, its authority is really to be found only in certain islands within the country. The Lagos-Ibadan corridor, the national capital of Abuja, Port Harcourt, the center of the petroleum industry, and state capitals. Otherwise, much of the country is in fact not ungoverned spaces, but rather spaces that are ruled by informal groups, be they jihadis or traditional rulers or criminal gangs, or in some cases, local authorities. So our traditional diplomacy, which focuses on the central government, on the president, on the foreign minister, that has to continue because weak though they are, and certainly in Nigeria, they continue to exist. But there needs to be much broader engagement with the Nigerian people, with religious leaders, traditional rulers, opinion makers, local satraps than we have had up to now. That's necessary if we're going to develop the kind of granular understanding of what is going on to inform good policy making. For example, Boko Haram broke into popular consciousness in 2011. It dates, and there's no real agreement on from when it dates, but commonly cited is 2009 or even 2002 or 2003. Yet we know remarkably little about it. And in fact, we know remarkably little about how it relates to jihadi movements for religious reformation and reform that recur in the West African Sahel and go back to even before colonial times. How are we going to develop our own policy with respect to Boko Haram, a security relationship with a state which most Nigerians don't like and want to have little to do with? How are we going to do that without the kind of granular knowledge that informs the decisions that we are going to make? So I hope my book will be a contribution to that, first by highlighting that new engagement with Africa carries risks, that solid policy making is going to require much more granular knowledge than we have now, and that our diplomacy needs to be more decentralized than it has been up to now. We need to be talking to a lot more than the chief of state and the foreign minister. By the way, in the specific case of Nigeria, in fact, because of the deterioration of the security situation there, our diplomats are largely cooped up within the embassy in Abuja and the consulate in Lagos, and can travel around the country only with great difficulty. Is that a start?
That's a very good start, and I would like to ask a question. You pose an intriguing thing here of a change, a sea change, in fact, in the way we conduct diplomacy. And I guess the question I would have is, what do you propose we do to prepare our diplomats adequately to conduct this non-traditional diplomacy with Africa that you have stated is required if we're going to have an effective policy there?
There are a couple of really quite fundamental things that I think have to be done. If we are going to decentralize our diplomacy, particularly in a country like Nigeria, which has severe security issues, we have to think more realistically about how our diplomats can move around and how can their security be assured. Now, my own view is that that's quite possible. The Israelis have done it. We've done it in places like Pakistan and Afghanistan. The issue is it costs money. I would also suggest that it costs far less money than making major policy mistakes. First point. Second point, we need to decentralize our diplomatic presence. For example, in the late colonial period in Nigeria and in the early post-independence period, we had consulates in Port Harcourt, Ibadan, Kaduna. We had a presence in Kano. At present, we have the embassy in Abuja. We have the consulate in Lagos. All those other consulates were closed largely because of budgetary concerns. And yet we need a presence all over the country, which can best be done by the reestablishment of American offices, be they consulates or be they something like the institutions that the British Council has established. But we need listening posts around the country, and we need to have a way that Nigerians can communicate directly with us that does not require them to go to Abuja and to Lagos. The third element is our diplomats going to Africa need to get training that we have provided for years to diplomats who go to first the Soviet Union and now Russia or China. In other words, we need to ramp up the training of diplomats. It goes beyond the sort of traditional area studies. In some parts of the continent, for example, our diplomats should have Swahili. In Nigeria, Hausa is the language of the North. The percentage of Nigerians who speak fully idiomatic English, and English is the only official language in the country, that's been estimated to be about 10%, with maybe 50% of the population knowing some English. And in the North, the heartland of Boko Haram, the overwhelming language is Hausa. At any one time, we may have 1 or 2 students at the Foreign Service Institute studying Hausa. At other times, we have none. So decentralization, training, rethinking security. It's also going to require a change in our own psychology, which strikes me, at least, as being one of extreme risk avoidance. It seems to me that you work to minimize risk, but you can never do away with it altogether.
You bring up an interesting point here, and it's just the risk avoidance culture that exists in the U.S. State Department. How would you propose, if you had to make a proposal to the new administration, how would you address this issue of risk avoidance in the Department of State?
Several ways. First, a rethink of the role of the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. Diplomatic security as a bureau has as its mission the protection of U.S. government employees overseas. Obviously, protection is going to lead to a general presumption of risk avoidance. Secondly, better training of Foreign Service officers. Thirdly, closer liaison, closer conversations with the Hill. One thinks about Benghazi. Benghazi was an unmitigated tragedy, but Benghazi got converted into a domestic US political issue, which in turn reinforced risk avoidance. And then I think we also need to look at how the State Department pursues accountability. Accountability review boards, as they presently function, and if I understand them correctly, in effect, a person that goes before them is presumed guilty until proven innocent. That's going to promote a risk avoidance culture at the very top.
Thank you. Before we go to general questions from the audience, Ambassador Campbell brought up an interesting question, Adrian, that I think needs to be expanded. He talked about the Congo Rainforest, well, Africa in general, and diseases, and that's, of course, in light of the COVID pandemic, really important. But another issue related to the Congo Rainforest that wasn't mentioned was its impact on climate change, and how we balance trying to protect this carbon sink that's second only to the Amazon rainforest and the requirements of people in that region to have food self-sufficiency and livelihoods. You have any thoughts on that?
Well, the first thought I have is extraordinarily important. As you already implied, the rainforest in Central Africa is second only to the Brazilian rainforest, which is also being threatened. I'd like to take it a little more generally. John emphasized, Ambassador Campbell emphasized the enormous importance of the population growth. Okay, that in itself is going to be further pressure on, as he mentioned, that will result in further pressure on deforestation, et cetera, and therefore climate change, and also desertification with overgrazing in the north, et cetera. But I'd like to come back to the larger point that we have tended in the United States to see Africa as a tertiary, not even a secondary, but a tertiary priority in our foreign policy. And I think he has an excellent point in saying that over the next decade or two, it objectively will become, in terms of our objective national interests, a very high priority, a primary area of focus, or it should become. The question is, will we catch up enough, both in the resources and attention we devote to Africa, and secondly, in the methodologies that we use. And he's proposing a rather revolutionary, but I agree with it. For anybody of your generation and mine, Charlie, that has read The Ugly American, you'll remember the idea that the guys who stay, or the guys and gals who stay in the Capitol and attend diplomatic receptions and talk to the foreign minister or the prime minister's office weren't the ones who were doing the real work that needed to be done. It was the people who got out in the field, into the field. Yes, it requires some risk, and our military take risk all the time. So I agree with John about the need to decrease the risk aversion. When I was political counselor in Paris, we had a really serious threat against American diplomats in Western Europe, and particularly in France. I actually had the French escorted me to work when I was being driven to the embassy because of the fear of terrorist attacks, and one army attaché was killed. So what the security officer did was come to look at as a political counselor, look at our apartment and say, oh, well, he went into different rooms and said, oh, there could be somebody who could shoot you from the rooftop of a nearby house. Solution, we brick off the window entirely. In other words, zero risk. But what does it do to your ability to be in contact with the society that you're trying to understand and you're trying to represent the United States to? So I think he has a very good point.
Yeah.
We have a status report from Eli about whether we're getting any contact back with Ambassador Campbell.
We have not yet got him back. Excuse me. Yeah.
I've emailed the ambassador and his assistant, so hopefully they can get back on soon. In the meantime, Charlie, why don't we go to Q&A
Okay.
And see if we can answer some of those questions
We'll give it a try.
while
Yeah.
we're waiting.
And I think some of those questions are more generally relevant that we have from our audience. So one of them you've addressed, which is the whole security profile of our embassies and sort of an over cautious approach to diplomacy. One of the questions I would have for you, and I don't know if it's one size fits all, but looking at our diplomatic missions overseas and sort of the elements of national power, some I think over the last few years would say we have put too many eggs in the military basket, that we have asked our military forces, which are, I suspect, far more expensive and costly than our diplomats, to conduct diplomacy. Do you have any thoughts on that? And can you give any examples of where you think that balance has been right, or maybe where it hasn't?
Well, from my own experience, when I was ambassador to Cambodia and when I was ambassador to Zimbabwe, this issue of how much do you rely on the military and how do you control their activities were big issues. And one of the problems from my point of view is that quite often our political leaders look for quick fixes, and you know, you want something done quickly, you send in the military. They will go in and they will fix it. Unfortunately, and having spent 20 years in the military, I'm not knocking my former colleagues. Quite often, once they fixed it, then the diplomats have to go in and spend the next 5 years fixing all of the things that went wrong from their quick fix. I would give you an example. In the early 2000s, when I was in Cambodia, a proposal was floated to put special military elements in our embassies related to the war on terrorism. Unfortunately, the chain of command that they developed for these embassies cut the State Department, and in some cases, even the ambassador, out. And you had these essentially what I called rogue elements that would be stationed in an embassy, but not totally under that ambassador's control. The way, and it was a patchwork response. Some ambassadors who understood how the military operates, me included, basically pushed back and said, not no, but hell no. You're not putting these people in my embassy until we have a better understanding of who gives them orders and who has the authority to control what they do. Other embassies just rolled over and allowed it. And in one case, I won't go into details, the team wasn't on the ground longer than a month before they had created a diplomatic incident with the local government that caught everyone in the embassy completely off guard. That required several years to work that out. What needs to be done, in my view, is that there needs to be, from the top here in Washington, a clear statement by the administration as to who is in charge of U.S. policy in a country and what must be done before you deploy military elements. We have historical deployments that work well. For example, non-combatant evacuations. Logistically, they're a nightmare, but in terms of command and control, everyone understands that when the military is called in to evacuate an embassy, an American citizen from a country in crisis, the ambassador, the embassy, the State Department is in charge, and the military, except for emergency situations that they have to respond to, are under State Department control. since the war on terrorism became the big ticket thing in US policy, we have often had military deployments in countries, and the ambassador is often the last person to hear about it until something goes wrong. And that to me should not be the case. I mean, if we're not engaged in a war in a country, everything that happens in that country should be coordinated through the embassy because, well, I mean, just to put it bluntly, you put the military in to solve a quick problem on the ground, they go in and they do what the military is good at doing. They go in and they break things, and they break things quickly, and they go back home. And that poor embassy then has to go in and pick up the pieces and try and put them back together. That's not the way it should work. And in Africa, that's especially important because of what Ambassador Campbell said. Too many of these countries, you have a central government that has only tenuous control over large regions of the country. You have the traditional leaders, and when you go in and you do something in a province or in a region that totally upsets the local leadership, it doesn't matter if the central government's on your side, you've got a big problem in that country. And it's complicated thing that, but this over reliance on the military to get things done quickly loses sight of the fact that the relationship with a country is a long-term thing that has to be tended with a long view. And before you do something to solve a problem quickly, you need to look at all of the possible impacts of a quick solution and whether it's worth it. And we really don't do that. I think there needs to be a better job of coordinating in the Washington bureaucracy before we make these decisions to deploy the military to a region.
Adrian?
If I may, just want to add, if I may, just for a second, I very much agree with what Charlie has said, what Ambassador Ray has said. And an ambassador gets a letter from the president when he's sent overseas saying, you are in charge. You have all the authorities except when there's a military combat operation going on in the country. In that case, the local commander is independent of the ambassador. But only if the ambassador really enforces it. In other words, says, hell no, as opposed to just saying, okay, well, we'll hope things work out nicely. Only there is it going to work. But I want to make another distinction. And that is, we have been so heavily, it's an obvious point, but I think it's worth emphasizing. We've been so over-dependent on the use of operational military forces to combat the war on terrorism, et cetera, that we have neglected the civilian side. I see that John is back. I don't know if he had already heard my question before he...
I had not heard it. You had just started.
Let me repeat it very quickly, if I may. You hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So it's about Boko Haram and the other jihadi groups in the northern area of Nigeria. They've obviously been a major concern. We've tried to some extent, you'll know infinitely more than I, to what extent to assist the Nigerian government in dealing rather unsuccessfully with Boko Haram. So my question is, how would you apply the perspective or the lessons learned, the perspective of your book to retrospectively to our failures and maybe some successes in dealing with Boko Haram over the last few years? And secondly, looking forward, how would you apply, how should we do things differently to be more successful against the jihadi movements in Nigeria and contiguous countries?
Thank you. Those are very important questions. First of all, U.S. assistance to Nigeria with respect to Boko Haram has been absolutely minimal. It's been minimal in part because the Nigerians have insisted that any such assistance be entirely on their own terms. And what in effect they have asked for is arms sales and check writing. And in fact, the unwillingness of successive US administrations to sell the kind of sophisticated military equipment that the Nigerians have asked for has been an irritant in the official bilateral relationship. But there's a further problem, and that is the Nigerian government's response to Boko Haram has been the hammer. It's been the belief that they can defeat militarily Boko Haram. It's like the Afghan government's belief that it can defeat the Taliban militarily. There is no political process underway in the north, and no political process designed to essentially try to separate out certain elements of Boko Haram who might be open to some kind of negotiation. Now, lessons from my book, and with respect to what the United States could do. First of all, we need to know a lot more about Boko Haram. To what extent, for example, does it enjoy popular support? It clearly has some, because it's been active now for an entire decade, and it continues to be able to recruit. Secondly, we need to be able to foster some kind of conversation amongst Boko Haram, local satraps, traditional rulers, particularly religious figures, and then also the government in Abuja. We can only do that if we have some kind of presence, if not in territory controlled by Boko Haram, at least not very far from it. Is that a start?
That's a very good start. In other words, we'd have to do what your book prescribes in order to have even an understanding and a basis to making a policy and getting to where we might be able to assist. John, thank you very much. I don't want to hold things up anymore because there's so much more and our time is a little bit limited, but thank you for that.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions, and we have one about China. And the question is, can we match China in Africa? They seem to be putting money and effort into Africa that we are not. Can you talk about what the Chinese and perhaps other rival powers such as Russia, even Turkey, are doing in Nigeria, and how should U.S. policy respond?
I think it's important, as you just indicated, that we not keep the conversation to China, because the Turks, for example, are increasingly influential. They have established Turkish schools in Nigeria, which liberal Muslims are sending their children to, because it includes education based on science and mathematics. The Indian community in Nigeria is quite large. It's pre-colonial in origin, and by and large quite successful. If we're talking about the Chinese, we also have to talk about which Chinese. The Taiwanese Chinese, again, have been active in Nigeria since before independence. So too have the Hong Kong Chinese. If we're talking about the Beijing Chinese, their focus has basically been on infrastructure in return for oil. Typically what happens is there will be grandiose announcements that the Chinese are acquiring this oil block or that. And then it more or less goes away because they cannot find Nigerian partners. And to transfer an oil block requires an indigenous partner. All of that said, the Chinese are in the process of restoring the railway network in Nigeria. And there is clear interest by the Buhari administration in infrastructure for oil. So I suspect we will see increased Chinese influence in Nigeria. But as your questioner suggested, we should not ignore others, the Indians, Turks, Gulf, that are also newly active there.
We have several questions that touch on this theme, Ambassador Campbell, that you mentioned, that maybe we have to extend beyond state to state diplomacy simply because there's not one Nigeria. There's
That's right.
the Sahel culture, which is very different and very important. And again, asks about what's the cultural differences, say, between Nigeria and the English-speaking part of Cameroon. Should we be also more engaged with civil society rather than engaging primarily with the government? And maybe we are, but could you address the approach to handling a huge country like Nigeria more effectively as a state?
In principle, yes, we should be more engaged with civil society. We already are, particularly in the South, in the more developed parts of the country. A problem is that civil society in the North is relatively weak and underdeveloped. I think perhaps we should expand how we think about civil society. Very often we think about civil society as essentially NGO organizations, and indeed they are part of civil society. But I would suggest that we should think about imams, cadis, mosques in the Middle Belt and in the northern part of the country as a type of civil society, and that our outreach to them should be more coherent and more consistent.
Another question, we have a couple of them that touch on the expansion of social media and Zoom technology and other technologies. Does that enable us an opportunity to expand our contacts with more diverse communities in Nigeria to get around the security constraints? I would also take that a step farther and say technology has boomed in Africa in general and Nigeria specifically. And what opportunities does that provide for an expansion of the American relationship on all levels, both diplomatically as well as economically?
Provides a lot of opportunities. I did a little research when I was writing my book, and I found that in March of a year ago, an estimate was 85% of Nigeria's, at that point, 205 million people, had been online at one time or another during that month. And there are internet cafes all over the country. Certainly there are opportunities. I would also point out that those opportunities are being exploited by jihadi groups that are based in the Middle East and in Pakistan. I would go, though, even beyond that, and I would refocus on radio. Radio continues to be the way most Nigerians get their information. Radio is relatively free of government control, and there are many, many radio stations that broadcast in local languages. Of course, by and large, we don't know those local languages, and that makes it difficult. I am of two minds about how actually influential social media is. Conventional wisdom is that it can be transformative, but I'm just not sure. My experience has been that most Nigerians essentially focus on cell phones and the ability to communicate as opposed to using social media more broadly. Now, that said, in certain parts of the country, notably Lagos, social media is enormously important, and social media helped the demonstrators organize themselves when they were protesting against police brutality. and calling for the shutdown of so-called SARS police units. But that's the problem. When you're in a place like Lagos, you essentially are in the modern world. But the modern world is not most of the country. On the other hand, Lagos has a population, if you talk the metropolitan area, that is probably 3 times that of New York City. So it in and of itself is extremely important. That's why juggling the overall significance of something like social media is so difficult to do. Clearly extremely important in some places, much less others, I think.
In your book, you talk about Nigeria's turbulent post-colonial history, from the conflict in Biafra to the coup d'etat. And now we seem to have in Nigeria a pretty robust democracy.
To the contrary. Absolutely to the contrary. The most recent elections were a throwback to the poor elections of 2007 and 2011. The percentage of Nigerians that participate in elections has plummeted from the low 70s to most recently, I think it was in the low 30s. It's part of the general alienation from the state. Is increasingly authoritarian in its approach. Efforts to clamp down on things like social media, for example. So that I would say that Nigeria has the form of a democracy, but that the substance of democracy is less now than it was when I was ambassador there, which is now more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about Muhammadu Buhari? Because even though, as you know, he led a coup d'etat in, what was that, the early 80s, but I think by some Nigeria watchers, there was great hope when he came back to power. Can you comment on that?
Not least by me. I knew Buhari pretty well. I was in regular contact with him when I was ambassador there. Buhari is not corrupt, personally corrupt, has very little interest in money, lives very plainly, very simply, and that's part of the basis of his appeal to the street, particularly in the north. He only has one wife. He has daughters whom he has insisted be educated up through the MA level because, as he says, they're going to have to support themselves. There won't be any money. So in so many ways, he was the basis for hope. The issue, I think, for him is that corruption is so deeply ingrained in the system. The difficulty he faced was that corruption is so widespread that he has ended up being overly dependent on an ever narrower circle of advisors, most of whom are either relatives, very often distant, but come from the same Fulani ethnic group that he does, and who are also Muslim, further isolating him from particularly the population in the South, which is predominantly Christian.
Can the country be then a functioning democracy as you know, a modern nation state, given the divisions of the country?
It could, if it in fact were to implement genuine federalism, which it never has. I mean, it's the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and states have some authority, but the revenue is all controlled centrally. So in effect, I think it's very important. Nigerians often look to the United States and our own federalism, but there's a huge difference. The federal government in the United States was created by the states. In Nigeria, the states were created by the federal government. So that in effect, when Nigerians say that Nigeria remains a colonial entity, the only difference is that the British left and were replaced by indigenous elites. That's kind of what they are getting at. Mm-hmm. That it's a centralized system that operates for the benefit of the top 1 or 2% that have no sense of obligation to the mass of the population. But now, if you can move away from that to a more centralized approach in which the states are actually able to function across a broader range of issues, then I think, yes, the future could be much more positive than it looks now.
Was there any, what was the impact of the move of the capital from Lagos to Abuja? Did it make any kind of a difference, good or bad?
At the time, it was thought that it would promote a kind of national cohesion. Where the capital was established in Abuja was an area where river blindness had been quite widespread, and therefore there was almost no indigenous population there at all. So the idea was that you were starting from a clean slate. Mm-hmm. Now, in the monumental core of the city, you have maybe 600,000, 700,000 people, with between 5 and 6 million people living in shanty towns that surround it. Part of that is because of the flow of people into a place that is relatively safer than much of the north. Critics will say that what the establishment of Abuja did was it further isolated the elites from the mass of the population, just as people will say Washington, D.C. isolates itself from the mass of Americans.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. We have about a minute left. Ambassador, are there any important topics, any final observations that you think are important for our audience to know?
The overwhelming importance of religion in Nigeria. Religion infuses absolutely everything. And for that reason, we need to take it into much greater account than we normally do. And that in turn requires much closer dialogue with religious leaders, both Muslim and Christian. If you open a conversation with a Nigerian, my experience has been that within the first minute or so, he will have signaled what his religious loyalty is, whether he's Christian, Muslim, or whatnot. He sort of expects you to do the same. And of course, for we Americans, that's really quite foreign. That's all part of getting out of our own mindset and seeking to understand where they are coming from.
Really fascinating. Unfortunately, we're going to have to draw this fascinating discussion to a close, but thank you, Ambassador Ray, Ambassador Basora, and especially Ambassador Campbell for a really interesting discussion. I'd also like to thank our supporters and board members who are on this call. We can't do this without you. If you'd like to listen to this again or share it with your contacts, the video should be going up within an hour. You can find it on the FPRI YouTube channel. If you're not a member, come check us out, www.fpri.org. Thank you again and stay safe.
Thank you.